Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Hope sat on a bench in the hospital square and couldn't hold back tears. It was the height of April, a wonderful time of year, fresh, just blooming leaves, gentle sunshine, a pleasant light breeze filled with the sense of warm earth. Hope loved spring very much. Right now, she would love to take a walk, enjoy the good weather, make plans for the summer, but she sat near the hospital building and cried. Fortunately, there was no one nearby, so she could let her feelings flow. Armando, her beloved husband, the man who accepted Hope and understood her like no one else. He was in the intensive care unit now. Just 6 months ago, he was a strong, healthy man, as reliable as a stone. Next to him, all problems seemed trivial. Hope knew he would do anything for her, move mountains, reach for the moon. He gave her a sense of security, protection, cheered her up when she was sad, said the right supportive words when she needed encouragement. They were like two halves of one whole. It may sound cliché, but it was true. It seemed that Armando could read Hope's thoughts. And even now, lying in the hospital bed, all entangled in sensors and wires from the floor, he was still trying to support Hope. "Don't worry, we'll break through." That's what Armando said today when he noticed that his wife was about to burst into tears. Hope held herself together, of course. It was the last thing she needed for Armando to spend his last strength trying to calm her down. But he could see right through her, and, of course, he understood all her feelings. "We'll break through." Unlikely. Armando only knew the general outlines of his diagnosis, but Hope was constantly in touch with his treating physician, Professor Velasco, a luminary of modern medicine. Hope's parents used all their connections to ensure their son-in-law received treatment from him. When it all worked out, it seemed that the worst was behind them. Now Armando was in safe hands. But doctors, even the best of them, were not gods, and they couldn't work miracles. Armando could only be saved by a miracle. It hurt Hope to see her husband like this, pale, exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes. His voice had even changed, becoming weak and barely audible. And with each passing day, the condition of this still relatively young man was getting worse. If initially Hope had hoped that everything would work out, now. "Get ready," Professor Velasco said just a couple of days ago. "The disease is progressing rapidly. Supportive therapy is becoming less and less effective. Vital signs are deteriorating, and there's still no response from the donor bank, and it seems there won't be any. The queues are enormous. Unfortunately, there's a great risk that Armando won't make it. He needs an urgent operation, but there's no donor." An urgent operation. He hadn't even consulted doctors. From childhood, he had been exceptionally healthy, even colds and the flu bypassed him. Tall, athletic, energetic, strong, and enduring. Armando sometimes half-jokingly supposed that his parents were countryside people well known for their excellent health. Looking at her husband with his thick, russet hair, wide, white-toothed smile, and beautiful, clear skin, Hope couldn't help but think about what wonderful children they would have. Armando's genetics were clearly good, although it was impossible to say anything about it for sure because Hope's husband didn't know his parents. Armando grew up in an orphanage. Yes, in an orphanage, within the institutional walls among completely unfamiliar people. When the boy grew old enough to start asking questions about his past, the caregivers initially brushed him off. Then one nanny finally enlightened the boy. It turned out that Armando's mother had abandoned him right in the maternity hospital. She was apparently an alcoholic. Tall, well-built, even beautiful, but her life had taken a downturn. She already had several children at home, one smaller than the other, which she needed to feed and support somehow. And there was no husband in the family, so Armando's mother decided that she couldn't handle another child and wrote a refusal. She told the staff at parting that maybe this was the best thing she could do for her son because there was a chance that he, still so young, would be taken into another family. But Armando was never taken into another family. It was a tough, unstable time. Few children were adopted then, and birth rates had plummeted. People were surviving as best as they could. So Armando grew up in an orphanage. He would sometimes tell Hope about his childhood years. He would speak deliberately cheerfully, recalling funny stories, often mentioning friends. Armando never pitted himself, he never complained about his fate. It wasn't in his nature. In general, he preferred to look at life with optimism. However, Hope understood that her beloved had a difficult childhood. Some small details in his stories revealed a tough upbringing. For example, the sweets that were shared among all the children, each getting only one piece, with no extras. Or the attitude of the embittered nannies. And, of course, the punishments. This was not to mention that unlike her, the beloved and only daughter of caring parents, Armando had no one to entrust his emotions to, no one to support him. One might think that a person who grew up in such a cold environment would be indifferent, inattentive, and distant. But Armando, he became something entirely different. More sensitive and kind than anyone Hope had ever met. They met by chance. Hope was studying economics at the local university at the time. The students had just finished a challenging session. Hope's girlfriends from her group decided to celebrate at a club, dance, have fun, and relax after intense studying. Hope looked fantastic that day, and she knew it. She wore a light, flowing dress that accentuated her graceful figure and showed off her long, slender legs, with her light chestnut hair let down, and an elegant makeup. A model, and that's exactly how she felt about herself. She caught the glances of those around her, clear evidence of her attractiveness. It felt wonderful. Her friends danced a lot that evening, laughed, joked, and got to know some guys. One or another of Hope's classmates would approach one of her friends and invite her to dance. But Hope wasn't as lucky. The first man to approach her was of rather unpleasant appearance, probably in his 30s or even older. The girl politely smiled at him and declined with some plausible excuse. Then a young man with an arrogant demeanor tried to drag her onto the dance floor. It felt like he thought he was doing her a great favor by approaching her. No, Hope didn't want to be in the company of such guys. She'd rather chat with her friends. But male attention was still flattering. Then, towards the end of the evening, to the table where Hope suddenly found herself alone, he came, Armando. A handsome young man, wearing a gray t-shirt, faded jeans, sneakers, slightly tousled thick russet hair, beautiful green eyes, and a charming, albeit slightly embarrassed, smile. Somehow, Hope felt instantly drawn to him, to this guy. She smiled at the young man. Encouraged by this, he took a seat opposite the girl. "May I?" he clarified, already settling in front of the girl. Yes, she nodded and smiled again. Of course, she could have pretended to be a princess, as is customary for girls, to start a game of charm me if you can, but why bother? This guy behaved so simply and naturally that Hope didn't want to play. And he had such a special aura about him. Hope liked being around him. "My name is Armando. And can I know your name?" "Hope," the girl honestly replied. "Beautiful name. I don't know anyone else with the same name." "It's in honor of my grandmother," Hope clarified. "And, by the way, your name is interesting too. I don't know anyone with the same name." They talked a bit more. No awkwardness, no tension. It felt like they had known each other for many years. And then Hope's friends returned to the table. Armando greeted them. The girls started glancing at each other and giggling. Everything was as usual, but it didn't seem to faze the young man at all. To Hope's surprise, he didn't even linger his gaze on Alicia's neckline, which was certainly worth showing off. No guy could resist her obvious charms. But Armando, it seemed like there was only one hope for him. He looked at her and never took his eyes off his new acquaintance. This made Hope's head spin a little. She knew she was quite attractive, slim, tall, with the right facial features. But no one had ever looked at her with such admiration. A slow song started playing, and Armando invited Hope to dance. Finally, they leaned towards each other on the dance floor to the sounds of a touching melody. Armando didn't allow any extra closeness. Hope felt his warmth and strength. She literally dissolved in these pleasant sensations. She wanted him to hold her like this forever. Hope eagerly breathed in Armando's scent. She liked absolutely everything about this new acquaintance of hers. She didn't know who he was, what he did, where he worked or studied, but she already understood the main thing: he was a reliable and very kind person. Next to him, she felt like a fragile, graceful creature. It seemed like he knew exactly what to do, and all she had to do was follow him. And then the melody ended. Armando smiled at the girl and thanked her for the dance. "I need to step away for a moment," the guy said, escorting Hope back to her table. "My friend called, he needs help. But I'll be back. Please wait for me. Just don't disappear, okay?" "Don't count on it, I won't disappear," Hope joked. The evening continued. Hope listened to her friend's impressions of the club and new acquaintances. She seemed to be listening, smiling, and even inserting some remarks where necessary, but all of this no longer mattered or interested her. She was waiting for Armando. Hopefully, this wonderful guy would return soon. Let him hold her in a dance again or look at her with that same gaze. Armando just disappeared for some reason. He wasn't anywhere to be seen. At first, Hope was worried, then she started getting angry. In the end, she concluded that her new acquaintance had simply met someone else, some girl he was currently charming. Probably typical club charmer. Strangely, though, Hope felt jealousy and anger at these thoughts. Amazing, considering that by that time, she had only known Armando for about half an hour. They hadn't even exchanged phone numbers. And he hadn't promised her anything. Well, you can't control your heart, as they say. "Has your admirer disappeared?" Christina asked sympathetically, apparently noticing the sadness in her friend's eyes. "But you liked him, didn't you?" "No," Hope lied. "There's nothing special about him. Just another guy, a million like him." "Right," Alicia praised. "There are plenty of them, and you're one of a kind, a queen. Let's go to the bar on the next street. Everything's quiet here already, but there it's just getting started." Alicia was the most experienced partygoer in their group of friends. She knew many places in the city where you could have a great time. The others greeted her suggestion with enthusiasm, except for Hope. She still hoped and waited. What if he comes back after all? What if something prevented him from coming on time? Well, that would be silly. It's silly to wait for a barely acquainted guy who seemed to have forgotten about your existence altogether. Besides, she didn't want to break away from her friends. The girls called a taxi, and the cheerful group poured out onto the club's porch. It was very late, and it seemed like it was starting to rain. The car arrived, and the friends loaded into the back seat. The driver quickly brought them to the bar through the deserted streets. The first person Hope saw when she got out of the car was Armando. At first, she couldn't believe her eyes. "We didn't even exchange phone numbers," the guy said, approaching closer. "When I realized that, and then saw that you weren't there anymore, it was like a bucket of ice water poured over me. I was so afraid I'd never see you again." "But how did you find us?" Lively Alicia interjected. "I saw you getting into a taxi as I was coming out onto the porch. I caught a ride and followed you," the guy explained. Hope smiled. No one had ever done such a thing for her. It was like something out of a movie. "So, are you joining us at the bar or what?" Alicia inquired. Armando looked at Hope questioningly. "Or what?" she replied to her friends. "We'd rather take a walk." Armando beamed, and the girls smiled knowingly. "Whatever you want," Christina said. "Just make sure to text me when you get home, understood?" Hope nodded. She knew that responsible Christina was worried about her and had specifically asked Hope to let her know when she got home so that the young man would know he was being watched and wouldn't dare do anything bad. They strolled through the nighttime city, holding hands. They didn't want to say goodbye at all. They talked about everything and nothing, and sometimes they just remained silent. Words were not needed at that moment. Near Hope's home, Armando kissed her. Her head spun. She had been waiting for this moment for so long, but Armando had hesitated. He had been very cautious with her, as if he was afraid of scaring her away. "I actually thought for a long time before approaching you that night," the guy confessed. "I watched you for a long time, saw how you turned everyone down, but I couldn't gather the courage. I thought maybe you'd politely send me away too. And then how would I live with that?" Armando and Hope started dating. The girl learned a lot about this young man, and some details of his life initially shocked her. It turned out that Armando grew up in an orphanage. He had never seen his parents, and he didn't even know who his father and mother were. This didn't make sense to Hope. How? How could someone survive without the care and support of a mother and father? But Armando survived, and not only that, he had actually done quite well for himself. Unlike most children from the orphanage, Armando devoted a lot of time to his studies. "I understood that otherwise I wouldn't have a future in life," Armando shared his memories with Hope. Seeing the determination of their diligent student, the teachers helped him, guided him, provided extra help, and encouraged him. The guy was very grateful to them for this, especially to his physics teacher. Armando dreamed of becoming wealthy and famous and planned to visit this caring teacher after achieving his goals to express his gratitude. With his excellent diploma, Armando easily entered a prestigious college of economics and computer science. Here, he quickly became one of the top students. At the same time, he started working part-time, taking small orders online. He saved money, realizing that he would need it after leaving the orphanage. After all, Armando had no one to rely on in life. He could only count on himself. Then Armando graduated from the orphanage and received an apartment from the state as a full-fledged orphan. The apartment was in a new building in a decent neighborhood, but it was just walls. Fortunately, Armando had managed to save up for renovations over the years of his studies. By that time, he was already working in a major IT company. He had plans to attend university to obtain a higher education and continue climbing the career ladder. However, he kept postponing it because, in addition to his main job, he had many side gigs that he didn't want to give up. He needed money, he needed a financial safety net. That was the only way he could feel secure. Armando was the same age as Hope, but he had already experienced so much, knew so much about the world and life that he seemed like a person wise beyond his years to her. He had to grow up early, worry about providing for himself at a young age. Hope was still supported by her parents. She felt like a mommy and daddy's girl, and Armando. This guy had already achieved so much. He knew how to earn money, how to save, how to handle everything on his own. Strength and confidence emanated from him. Armando knew exactly what he wanted from life. This couldn't help but command respect. Despite all this, Armando was very kind and sensitive and needed love and acceptance. Hope felt that. He hadn't received enough attention in childhood and now cherished sincere feelings and goodwill. Armando was so different from all the guys Hope had known. She thanked fate for their chance encounter in the club. When Hope finished university, Armando proposed to her. It wasn't a big surprise for the girl, and her parents weren't surprised either. By that time, Armando had long been acquainted with Hope's parents. He was highly regarded by both the girl's mother and father. "Such a handsome, good guy, and such a difficult fate," sighed Hope's mother. "Well, God willing, everything will be fine for him now. Boy has done a lot for this. He's not a boy anymore, a real man." Her father objected. "I respect guys like him. Young, but already knows what he wants. He will achieve a lot." Hope and Armando got married, went on their honeymoon. It turned out that Armando had been saving money for all these events for a long time, so the celebration was splendid. The newlyweds began living together in Armando's apartment. They didn't experience any household friction. Everything went smoothly and naturally. Hope wasn't particularly skilled in household chores, but Armando never scolded her or even hinted at it. He took care of many house tasks himself. Hope watched his agile and confident movements and learned slowly. She also wanted to take care of her beloved. Hope even found herself enjoying cooking. In her family, the kitchen had always been her mom's domain. No one else was allowed near the stove. Hope never imagined how interesting it was to create dishes from a set of ingredients. Real creativity. Armando praised his young wife's cooking, even when a dish didn't turn out well, burned, or was too salty. It was both funny and endearing. The spouses lived together harmoniously. They had so many plans for their life together, buying a new, more spacious apartment, traveling, and, of course, having children. Armando, who had spent most of his life alone, dreamed of having a large family. "You don't mind becoming a mother of many children, do you?" he jokingly asked. "We'll have a son first, then a daughter, then another son, and then twin girls." "What's the difference?" "We'll have lots and lots of children, like 5 or 6. That's not nearly enough. I, for example, dream of having 10. Can you handle that?" "I'll move mountains to make it happen." The spouses were joking, of course, but both actually dreamed of having children. Hope looked at her handsome husband and thought that their little ones would be wonderful, healthy, cute, and most importantly, loved and cherished. Armando was the best potential father one could imagine. He wouldn't shy away from spending time with their offspring and wouldn't dump all the responsibilities on his wife. No, he would be a loving, caring, and involved dad who would help with lessons, come up with interesting games, and provide support in difficult times. The couple dreamed of having children, starting with 2 at first, and then see how it goes. But the desired pregnancy still hadn't come. 2 years had passed since their wedding, and the family remained childless. Hope's friends were getting married one after another and announcing that they were expecting, then becoming mothers and inviting Hope to christenings and their children's first birthdays. Hope was happy for them, of course, but watching someone else's happiness was also painful. "We should undergo some tests," Armando said one day. "I can see how much you're suffering. Both of us should go to the doctor, find the cause, and everything will be fine." Hope, of course, had thought about it too but was somehow afraid. Since childhood, she had a fear of clinics and people in white coats. She was a bit of a coward in that regard. Armando turned out to be perfectly healthy, but for Hope, it was a different story. Serious problems were discovered in her. "Your diagnosis is not good," said the doctor, looking into Hope's eyes. "It doesn't threaten your life, but natural motherhood is impossible in your case. You can try IVF, but even there, the chances are slim." Hope cried that evening on her husband's shoulder. He comforted her, stroking her back and hair. "Why are you so upset? The doctor said we can try IVF. We'll try if you want to. If not, we can adopt a child from an orphanage. I want our child," Hope sobbed, "our own, someone who looks like you." "That doesn't matter," Armando assured her. "A child is a child." But they still decided to try IVF. The first attempt was unsuccessful, and so was the second. Finally, a pregnancy test showed 2 lines. It was a brief moment of joy followed by a miscarriage. Back to preparing for IVF, back to hopes, and back to disappointment. It took 3 long, painful years for all this to unfold. Hope was nervous. Her health suffered due to the endless medical procedures, but she was determined to achieve her goal. She desperately wanted a child. She painted bright pictures in her mind, Armando holding their own baby, warm, crying, alive. That image stayed with her. Hope felt she had to give Armando a son, she was obligated to do so. He had done so much for her. He loved her so much, understood her, and supported her. He was her rock and her hope. Could she really not fulfill his cherished dream? "That's enough," Armando said softly but firmly. This happened after another unsuccessful IVF attempt. Hope had already lost count of which attempt it was. But she was still taking her pills, preparing for the next procedure. Enough of what? Hope didn't understand. Enough of ruining your health. You need to take a break from all this. What do you mean? It's very simple. You stop taking these pills. We just live, enjoy life and each other, without thinking about all this. It was a tempting prospect. Hope herself was tired of these hopes and anxieties, of endless medical procedures and tests. But what about the child? But you dreamed of having a big family. I dream even more of a happy life with the person I love, with you. I want you to be happy, but you're wearing yourself out with all this. It's time to stop. What about the children? You can always adopt a child from an orphanage. But there, children come from all sorts of backgrounds, some from alcoholic families, and worse. Who knows what genes they carry? And what about me? I'm an orphan too, Armando reminded her. Okay, if you don't want someone else's child, I won't insist. But I won't let you harm yourself anymore. Hope was even glad that her husband had made this difficult decision for both of them. Armando seemed to have lifted the burden of responsibility for the future of their family from her shoulders, taking everything upon himself. And that was how it was in everything. Strong, decisive, wise. Hope trusted him more than anyone else. Armando was her protector, her guardian, her provider. She thought it would always be that way, but things turned out differently. Trouble came from an unexpected direction. It all began when Armando, always full of energy and strength, suddenly started getting tired quickly. He would come home from work and collapse in front of the television. For most people, this wouldn't be anything out of the ordinary, but not for Armando. He always had energy. After work, he would usually either repair something, take online orders, or take Hope for a walk. He didn't shy away from household chores either, always finding something to do in his free time, cleaning the storage room or balcony, fixing plumbing, or preparing a restaurant-level dinner. Armando was always busy. He couldn't stand idleness and laziness, but now, Hope initially found it annoying. She didn't want her husband to become like most of her friends' husbands, work, kitchen, and the couch. Then Armando started getting even more exhausted. Now, he would practically crawl home from work, pale, breathless, and completely drained. His appetite worsened, and he rapidly lost weight, and then those bruises on his body began appearing for no apparent reason. "You need to see a doctor," Hope decisively told her husband. "Don't even think about refusing. I've already scheduled an appointment with a therapist for you. I dare you to go to the appointment." "Thank you," Armando smiled. "And I won't even think about running away. I was planning to go myself." Hope was worried about her husband, but she was sure that nothing serious was happening to him. She thought the doctors would likely diagnose some vitamin deficiency, prescribe some vitamins, regular walks, and maybe they could go on a trip somewhere by the sea to relax, and everything would be fine. But the diagnosis sounded almost like a death sentence. It turned out that Armando had a rare autoimmune blood disorder. His own body was attacking itself. The worst part was that there was no medication for it. Armando was put on treatment, but the doctor immediately warned that the results would be weak and short-lived. Armando needed additional examinations. The life of the young couple suddenly changed dramatically. All their plans, hopes, and dreams became distant and unimportant. Even the impossibility of becoming parents no longer seemed like such a fatal issue. Armando's life was in danger, and Hope. She didn't even want to imagine a world without this man. Hope's parents were horrified when they heard the diagnosis of their son-in-law. Both of them loved Armando very much. They even considered him the son they never had. Hope's father pulled some strings with all his acquaintances and got his son-in-law registered with Professor Velasco himself. Hope thought that now, surely, they would cure Armando. She even cried with relief when her father gave her the joyful news over the phone. Only later did it become clear that it was too early to rejoice. Armando's condition worsened. He didn't leave the sick leave, spending all his days at home. He had so little energy that he couldn't even reach his computer, his workplace. Armando still tried to earn some money, taking orders online, but it became increasingly difficult. His attitude was more than optimistic, as always. He continued to make jokes, even teasing about his condition. Armando did everything to bring a smile to his wife's face. "Don't worry so much. I hardly ever got sick as a child. I have a super immune system. And I'll recover now." "That's the thing, your strong immune system is working against you in our situation," Hope sighed. "It's playing against you, to be precise." Hope searched for information on the internet, sought consultations with doctors who dealt with such diagnoses. She even sent her husband's test results abroad to get another medical professional's opinion. She fought for the man she loved. He was equally committed to his treatment. He endured painful and exhausting procedures patiently, taking medications on schedule. He wanted to live very much. Armando had so many plans, so many desires. He had no intention of giving up. Professor Velasco tried experimental treatment. Initially, it seemed to have some results, and hope flickered, but then the disease struck Armando with double force. He was admitted to the hospital. In the evenings, Hope cried in their empty apartment. Her parents suggested that she temporarily move in with them, but she refused. She slept on Armando's side of the bed, covered herself with his blanket, wore his clothes around the house, and cried a lot. Hope didn't want her parents to see her in such a state. They were already very worried about their son-in-law, and now their daughter was in hysterics. No way. Every day after work, Hope visited her husband. She stayed strong, smiled, but it was getting harder and harder to hold on. Armando was changing rapidly. His old clothes hung on him like sacks, and she had to buy him new ones several sizes smaller. His facial features sharpened, and his eyes now seemed incredibly large on his emaciated, angular face. It was painful to witness all these transformations. But Armando, despite the external changes, remained the same, cheerful, sensitive, and attentive. Friends and colleagues often came to visit him, offering support, asking him to recover quickly and return to action. Hope could see that these visits made her husband happy. After all, he loved socializing, being in the midst of events, and being helpful to others. Even here, in the hospital, Armando managed to assist those around him, whether it was pushing the medication cart to the nurse's station or helping a fellow patient reach the bathroom. Everyone in the hospital accepted and loved him. Armando dreamed of recovering quickly, returning home, and getting back to work. He missed the outside world within the sterile hospital walls, but his strength was leaving him rapidly. And very soon, his condition deteriorated to the point where he couldn't even get out of bed anymore. Now, Hope had to help him get up, sit by his side, hold his hand, run her fingers through his hair, and share the day's news. Armando could only be saved by a bone marrow transplant, a complex and expensive procedure. Money was not an issue. Resourceful Armando had managed to save a substantial amount. But finding a donor was not easy, almost impossible. "Your husband has a rare blood type," Professor Velasco shrugged. "It's a complicated case. It's already difficult for patients to find a suitable donor, and if the blood type is like that, what can we do?" "Wait, Hope. I've put him on the waiting list, but to be honest, the chances of him waiting it out are slim." When the topic of the operation came up, Professor Velasco immediately asked for compatibility tests for all of Armando's blood relatives. The chances of finding a donor among family members are high: a brother, a sister, parents if they are still alive. I don't think relatives would object to being donors. The procedure, of course, is not pleasant, but Armando is from an orphanage, Hope said in a lowered voice. He doesn't know his relatives. At that moment, the woman desperately regretted that they had never been able to have their own child. Perhaps a son or daughter would have been a salvation for her husband. Professor Velasco, always calm and composed, looked puzzled. "Well, we'll have to look elsewhere." But the search was progressing very slowly. There were a few candidates willing to save a stranger, but none of them were a suitable match. Hope was dwindling. Hope wiped her eyes and looked around. The hospital garden was still empty. Tears brought temporary relief. She was about to leave. After all, she had to get home through the evening traffic, but Poor Armando, a woman's voice sounded from just around the corner of the building. Hope startled. For some reason, she immediately knew that they were talking about her husband. Armando was not such a common name these days. The woman cautiously peeked around the corner. It was the staff smoking area. There were a few comfortable benches with backs, trash bins, and a small babbling fountain. Right now, 2 nurses from the hospital were sitting on a bench. Hope recognized them. She had often seen these nurses on the floor where Armando's ward was located. Both women were middle-aged and were clearly taking a break in the middle of a tough shift. Yes, it's a shame about Armando, the second nurse agreed. He's a young man, a good one, kind-hearted, and clearly not a troublemaker. He's fading before our eyes, and there's no way they'll find a donor for him. His indicators are so rare. Tears welled up in Hope's eyes again. She wanted to rush out of her hiding spot and shout at these women who had written off her beloved so easily. Yes, he has no relatives. It's a pity, the woman in the white coat nodded, flicking the cigarette ash away. You know, my mother-in-law lives in New Pines, you know the place. So when we visit them, I often see a guy there. He looks just like our Armando, like one and the same person. But Armando is a decent person, and this one is soaked through, unkempt. An alcoholic, in a word. So I'm thinking, what if he happens to be a relative of our Armando? Such a resemblance can't be a coincidence. I'm considering everything. Should I tell someone about this or keep quiet? Keep quiet, of course. You're always coming up with all sorts of things, and people will get all agitated and upset. They don't need any extra hassle, and things are already tough as it is. Just look at his wife, her face is completely gone. The conversation then turned to other topics, what to cook for dinner, how to properly raise children, whether it's worth planting tomatoes of a finicky variety at the summer cottage or better not to bother. Hope leaned against the wall to keep from collapsing. Her head was spinning again. New Pines, the name of the village, sounded familiar to her. It was all because a few years ago, Armando had finally decided to find his relatives. Why bother? Hope had wondered back then. Your mother left you at the maternity hospital. She didn't even bother to take you home, abandoned you, betrayed you, and now suddenly you, all successful and accomplished, want to find her. Why? Just to let her leech money off you later? You wouldn't understand, probably. Armando shook his head. It's so important to know your roots. What if I have brothers and sisters? I wonder if we're alike in appearance and character. It's hard to explain. Even if you find them, I don't think it will make you happy. They're probably not very good people. Good people don't abandon their young children. Hope remained resolute. She feared that Armando would be deeply disappointed, that it would hurt him, and she didn't want people like that entering their lives. She was almost certain that Armando's relatives were scoundrels who would undoubtedly use him, evoke sympathy, and demand responsibility. But Armando still started the search. He even hired private detectives for the job. However, the results didn't come quickly. Many years had passed, some documents had already been lost, but eventually, specialists managed to trace Armando's mother's origins and even discovered her name, Leticia Amaretto Cardozo. Armed with such information, finding the family was easier than ever. But Armando. He suddenly halted the search, paid off the detectives, and asked them to drop the case. Hope didn't understand her husband once again. Yes, I did want to find my family. I wanted to know who they were, why my mother abandoned me, but then, when I was so close to the goal, I changed my mind. Why? His wife was surprised. Well, I don't even know. Maybe I got scared. How do you look them in the eye? What do you talk about? And what if none of them are even alive anymore? How do you cope with that? Hope shrugged. It was only much later that she realized that Armando was genuinely afraid of disappointment. As long as he didn't know for sure, he could paint all sorts of pictures in his head and come up with justifications for his cuckoo mother. Now, Hope heard the mention of the village New Pines in the nurse's conversation. Armando's mother was from there. Woman remembered it very well. And here it turns out that in New Pines lives someone who looks exactly like Armando. Of course, it could be a mere coincidence, but what if it's not? After all, it's entirely possible that the woman who gave birth to Armando had more children. Perhaps one of them remained in New Pines. For the first time since learning about her beloved's terrible illness, Hope felt a surge of strength. She had a purpose now. She would definitely go to New Pines and find out everything. And in any case, even if there were no relatives of Armando left in the village, Hope now had a plan. Finding her husband's relatives, with the information about his mother, would be a breeze. Then it would just be a matter of convincing these people to undergo compatibility tests and perhaps offering them money in the end. That evening, Hope went to bed in high spirits. Instead of tormenting herself with heavy thoughts and tears, she carefully planned her actions. Tomorrow, she would take unpaid leave from work, then get in touch with the detectives, give them the green light to resume the search, and simultaneously head to New Pines to find the person the nurse had mentioned, the one who looked like her husband. The thought that the nurse might have exaggerated for dramatic effect or simply made a mistake, Hope diligently pushed out of her mind. It couldn't be. All of this couldn't just be a mere coincidence. She felt it deep down with an intuition she couldn't ignore. The next day was filled with chores and preparations. Hope finished all the important tasks at work because she wouldn't be in the office for at least a week. She went to visit Armando. Although he could barely raise himself in bed, he managed to find the strength to smile and wink at Hope. "You look especially beautiful today," Armando said, studying his wife. "Did something happen?" "I'm just in a good mood," Hope replied. Hope sat down next to him and took Armando's hand. He weakly squeezed her palm. "That's great. But I know you well, you're definitely planning something, aren't you? Come on, confess." Hope didn't want to give her husband false hope too early, and she couldn't let him worry now. No, he shouldn't know that tomorrow morning Hope would set out in search of his relatives. "Well, I just had such a good dream, as if you were healthy again, and we were going on a trip with our child." "A fantastic dream," Armando praised. "I have such dreams sometimes too." "So, sooner or later, it will come true," Hope confidently declared. Of course, Hope had lied to her husband about her dream, but during the night, she had indeed had a beautiful dream. She and Armando were walking down sunlit streets, each holding the hand of a child. Her heart swelled with joy, with the feeling of infinite happiness. It was a shame that the merciless ringing of the alarm clock had abruptly pulled Hope out of that dream. Hope got out of bed. It was 6 a.m, it was time to get ready. The train to New Pines was leaving in an hour, and she still had to reach the station. Hope put on a warm tracksuit and sneakers, tied her hair into a messy bun, put on a cap to shield her head from the sun during the day, and slung the backpack she had prepared the night before over her shoulders. She set out to face the unknown. As she sat on the train, Hope contemplated her plan. What would she do when she saw someone who looked like Armando? How would she approach him? What if he refused to listen, thinking her crazy? She had to be cautious, but also bold and decisive. The life of her beloved was at stake. New Pines turned out to be a large village. There was even a main wide street, and Hope walked along it for a while, scanning the faces of the few passers-by. She realized only now that she had made a mistake. She should have approached those nurses, talked to them, and found out where exactly the man who resembled Armando lived. But at that moment, Hope was too excited and agitated. She would have to search for the man herself now. Hope had many photos of Armando on her phone, including pictures taken before his illness. Maybe she should show them to the locals, ask if they knew where a man resembling her husband lived. But then, she thought, they would probably have to tell them the whole story, otherwise, no one would help her. She didn't want to bare her soul to strangers, so for several hours, Hope simply walked the streets of the village, carefully examining the faces of the few people she came across. She was particularly interested in men, but she hadn't seen anyone who looked like Armando so far. "Why are you wandering back and forth here?" Whom were you looking for? A creaky voice came from behind Hope. The woman was startled, turned around, and found herself facing an old man, small and wiry, with a thick mass of gray hair and a short gray beard. His face was dark from sun exposure, and his pale blue eyes were focused and attentive. "What?" Hope stammered. "That," the old man replied. "I've been watching you for about an hour now. You arrived in the morning and have been wandering around aimlessly. Did you lose someone?" "You could say that," Hope didn't argue. "And do you know everyone here? In New Pines?" "I know all the old-timers. But there are many newcomers these days. Can't possibly remember them all, of course." Hope sighed and decided to confide in this passerby because, well, what else could she do? Going back home was not an option. She had placed so much hope on this trip. "I'm looking for a man who resembles my husband. They say he lives here. Do you have a photo of your husband with you?" "I do." Hope smiled and showed the local resident a picture of Armando on her smartphone. "Well, there's one here who fits the description," the old man said, carefully examining the photograph. "That's Alex Amaretto." Amaretto. A shiver ran down Hope's spine. Armando's mother's name was Leticia Amaretto Cardozo. Another coincidence. Although the surname was not uncommon, it still. Hope was afraid the old man would start asking her why she was looking for this person, but he displayed remarkable tact. Silently, he led the woman to the right house and bid her farewell politely. A leaning fence, an overgrown yard, something resembling an impromptu dump next to a weathered wooden outdoor toilet. Sunlight glinted off broken bottles amid the trash. Hope cautiously pressed the doorbell button next to the gate and waited for a while. No one answered. Perhaps the bell wasn't working, as there was clearly someone inside the house. Hope could hear the mumbling of a TV and the clinking of dishes. So, she knocked. Softly at first, then louder. There was no response. Frustrated, Hope pounded on the door with all her strength and almost tumbled into the tall grass because the gate had swung open easily. The front door wasn't locked either. It was an open invitation to enter. Hope found herself in a dirty, neglected yard. She felt a moment of fear, imagining that a dog might suddenly come rushing from behind the house, or the owner might get angry. She had barged into someone else's property like this. But no one appeared. Then Hope gathered her courage and climbed the porch steps. The front door was unlocked too, but the woman hesitated to enter the house without permission. She knocked on the doorframe with her knuckles. The sound was feeble, but someone heard her. "Come in. Can't you see? The door is open." Hope thought that the homeowner was probably expecting someone else, as he clearly didn't anticipate seeing her, a stranger. Still, she entered. Inside, it smelled damp and old. The furniture was old, with torn upholstery and cracked wooden elements, a true antique. Unexpected items were strewn and piled everywhere, a shaggy doll with a face drawn on with a blue pen, swollen books with yellowed pages, an old cassette player, a floor tub with a ficus. Dishes cluttered every available surface. Some plates were clean and empty, while others were dirty with traces of food. From the room, a curious cat emerged onto the porch, presumably to see who had come. The TV's noise and the sound of a boiling kettle could be heard from the kitchen. Unexpectedly, amid this shabby and dirty dwelling, the scent of fried potatoes with onions turned out to be pleasantly inviting. Hope's mouth watered at the thought. She hadn't tasted anything this delicious in a long time. "Well, where were you all this time?" A man appeared in the porch. Hope was about to be frightened. Being alone with a stranger in his empty house was an adventure in itself. Who knew what he had in mind? But when she saw this man's face, she couldn't help but let out a surprised sigh. It was the same eyes as Armando, the same cheekbones, the arch of his eyebrows, the hairline, the facial expressions, even the mole on his neck. The homeowner bore an incredible resemblance to Hope's husband. Of course, there were differences. Armando had led a healthy lifestyle. He had clear skin, thick hair, and strong white teeth. Before his illness, he looked like a fit and handsome man. This man, on the other hand, clearly smoked a lot and indulged in drinking. Red, inflamed eyes, deeply set wrinkles, and unkempt stubble. His appearance was perfectly complemented by his attire, sweatpants worn down to the knees and a loose, unwashed tank top. "Who are you?" the homeowner asked. There was no accusation or threat in his voice, just curiosity. "From the Child Welfare Agency, perhaps?" I don't even know where to begin," Hope confessed. "Maybe you should start by looking at a picture of my husband?" The man shrugged and approached. Up close, he looked even more like Armando. Hope couldn't take her eyes off him. "All right, I've seen it," the homeowner said. "So what?" "He's a good-looking young man, but I don't know him. It's the first time I've seen him." "Did you not notice anything?" "All right, speak plainly. Your vague allusions are getting tiresome. I'm a straightforward person. I need everything spelled out, hints don't work for me." "This is a long and complicated story." "I see," the man nodded. "Well, come to the kitchen then. Would you like some potatoes?" This man was inviting her, a complete stranger, to sit at his table, and he was behaving with her as if she were his neighbor or an old friend. His way of communicating helped Hope overcome her awkwardness. Strangely, despite his unkempt appearance and signs of heavy drinking, the homeowner was becoming quite likable to Hope. Hope settled on a clutter-free stool and began to tell her story. At first, she was hesitant and stumbled over her words, but the man listened attentively. He didn't interrupt, didn't ridicule, and didn't even ask questions. He hung on to every word she said. His face remained seemingly calm, but Hope could tell. She noticed that her story was making a significant impression on this man. Hope began by talking about her husband's illness, then she mentioned overhearing the conversation of the healthcare workers, and finally, she disclosed the details of Armando's fate. She explained that her husband's mother had left him at the maternity hospital, and then the boy ended up in an orphanage, where he was raised. "And now I've seen you, and you know, even DNA analysis is not needed here. You and my husband are simply one and the same person." "Show me his photo again," the man requested. As he examined the pictures on Hope's phone, his hands trembled slightly, but his face remained impassive. "Could it be him? Could it be your Armando is my brother? You have a brother?" Desperately, Hope hoped she hadn't made a mistake, that this man was indeed Armando's relative who could save him from a life-threatening illness. "My name is Alejandro," the man suddenly said. "We never properly introduced ourselves. What's your name?" "Hope." "Hope. What a lovely name. Quite rare these days. So, did you ever have a brother?" "I did," Alejandro nodded. "Now I'll tell you the story, and the conclusions, we'll draw them later. It's not by chance that you ended up here, oh no, not by chance. Alex was the only boy in the family. At the time when the fateful events unfolded, he had just turned 8. Yet, he was already the only male figure in the family, a fact that his numerous sisters constantly reminded him of. The girls exploited their brother. They made him do the cleaning, fetch water from the tap in buckets, and even taught him to cook when he was just 5 or 6 years old. There was no father in the family. Well, technically, there were many fathers for the children living under the same roof, but none of them were eager to take responsibility for raising or supporting their offspring. Their mother probably couldn't even remember who fathered her children. She had many admirers. Her love for parties and revelry from a young age was ultimately her downfall. The family lived in the very same house where Alejandro resided now. They slept in whatever beds they could find. Creaky, narrow, old beds, a stove, mattresses on the floor, or sometimes just discarded coats and furs if they were lucky. Their mother received government assistance, and that's how they survived, or rather, how they managed to scrape by. Occasionally, Leticia Amaretto's numerous admirers would help. Someone would bring potatoes for the children, another would bring meat, and someone else would bring milk. Overall, the children lived in perpetual hunger. They went to school in tattered clothes, froze in the winter, and hardly ever saw any sweets, even on holidays. At that time, many people were struggling, but they made an effort to make ends meet and provide for their children. However, not Letitia. She was particularly unconcerned about the difficult economic situation in the country, hunger, and poverty. She flitted through life like a carefree and colorful butterfly. She saw her children more as helpers around the house or neighbors. She rarely hugged them, never nursed them when they were sick, and certainly didn't protect the younger ones from the bullying of the older ones. Sort it out yourselves. I don't need your quarrels, Letitia usually said when one of the children complained about being bullied. Alex had a tough time growing up in such an environment. His constantly intoxicated and overly cheerful mother, the constant presence of her guests, and the tyranny of his older sisters. The girls, it turned out, intended to follow in their mother's footsteps. Well, what else could they do? They had seen the example of such a life from an early age. What else could be expected of girls who grew up in such a family? First, the oldest sister brought her husband, a man twice her age, into the house. They had a child, which led to government assistance. The parties continued with renewed vigor. Then, the second sister followed suit. Alex's life was becoming increasingly unbearable. So many people in the small house, crying babies, hunger, and beatings from his mother and older sisters for not completing his chores. I actually wanted to run away, admitted Alejandro. I was just 8 years old, but I remember it very well. I thought I'd build myself a shelter in the woods, live there in peace and quiet, survive on berries and mushrooms. The main thing was to get away from all of them. Only the little ones stopped him. Little nieces and sisters who, Alex knew this, would be lost without him. Especially the youngest sister, sickly Lori, who needed care and attention like no one else. And then, suddenly, it turned out that their mother was expecting another baby. Children usually found out about the impending addition by the size of Letitia's belly, and she didn't even try to hide it. She had always treated her pregnancies lightly, but this time, the new baby upset her in advance. What do we need another mouth to feed for? Letitia lamented, sitting in the kitchen with a cigarette. We're already cramped for space, and now another freeloader is coming. Yes, the older daughters nodded sympathetically. It would be okay if they paid decent allowances for these freeloaders. Then it would be worth the suffering. But it's just pennies, that's all. I won't even bother taking the baby from the maternity ward. I'll write a refusal, and that will be the end of it. Little Alex even choked on a piece of bread. How could a mother refuse her own child? Discard it like trash? The boy had seen babies many times, nieces and younger sisters. He took care of them and understood how vulnerable and fragile newborns were. The very thought of abandoning such a tiny baby troubled him deeply. Mom, let's take the baby, Alex said. I'll take care of it. Alex's request provoked a fit of horse laughter at the table. You don't understand anything yet, you little scoundrel. Victor, the husband of the oldest sister, gave Alex a light slap. Alex went out into the yard. For some reason, he was convinced that this time his mother would give birth to a baby brother for him. The boy, growing up surrounded by sisters, had always dreamed of having a brother. He would teach him all the things boys should know: how to fish, carve wooden figures with a pocket knife, and climb trees. They would understand each other like no one else, and Alex wouldn't feel that crushing loneliness in the overcrowded house anymore. Even at his young age, Alex vaguely understood that the way they lived was wrong. It wasn't right. But he didn't have the strength to change the situation in any way. He believed that if he had a brother, they could face it together. Mom, please don't leave the baby at the maternity ward, Alex pleaded almost every day. Letitia's response varied. If she was in a good mood, she would laugh it off and tease him. If she was in a bad mood, she might even give him a light slap for being so persistent. But Alex, he didn't know how to convey to his mother what he felt. A brother. He meant so much to him. I still don't understand how I knew back then that my mother was expecting a boy, Alejandro said, looking into the distance. I just felt it, that's all. Maybe I just wanted it so badly. The mother was taken to the hospital in the middle of the night. Labor began during a raucous feast. At first, Letitia didn't even realize what was happening, and it was only later, when the contractions became so intense that they couldn't be ignored, that she understood what was going on. Someone among the guests called an ambulance, and they waited for it for a long time. The mother writhed in the corner, and the adults groaned and cursed the slow doctors. Someone even prepared to deliver the baby themselves. There was quite a commotion. Fortunately, the ambulance arrived just in time. They took Letitia to the maternity ward. Alex still remembered the look of disgust and disdain on the face of the woman in medical uniform. What are you thinking? Drinking in your condition. It's easier this way, Letitia honestly admitted. It makes it easier to endure this wretched life. Aren't you afraid of harming the baby? It's all nonsense. Letitia waved her hand. I've been drinking my whole life, and the kids are as strong and healthy as ever. The mother was taken away. Alex knew she would be back home in a week. That's how it always happened when she was taken to the maternity ward. The boy was afraid that his mother would carry out her plan, leave the baby, and not bring him home, abandoning his long-awaited and already beloved brother. Alex pestered his older sister Susanna with questions. Susanna, will Mom take the baby or abandon him? I don't know, sighed Susanna. It might be better if she left him. We're already so cramped. Where will we put another mouth to feed? Alex cried out of despair. His sisters, noticing this, immediately began to tease him. After the allotted time, the mother returned home, looking slimmer and refreshed from a week without drinking but with completely empty hands. Hello, dear family. I'm finally home. I got tired of that hospital. You walk on eggshells there, like in prison. We should celebrate my return, invite Pedro and Dolores, Nicholas, and the Monteros. Alex looked at his mother and felt tears welling up in his eyes. She didn't leave his brother behind. The boy rushed to his mother. Where's my brother? Where did you leave him? Tell me, I'll find him, I'll take him. Letitia, with a nasty grin, looked at her hysterical son. For Alex, the absence of his brother meant the collapse of all his hopes and dreams. Unable to bear the tension, the boy began to hit Letitia's hands and legs with his little fists, wherever he could reach. Oh, come on. The woman roughly grabbed the child, pushed him away. What brother? It was a girl. How can it be? But what about brother? And where is the girl, anyway? Huh, she died, calmly Letitia replied and headed to the kitchen. Is there anything to eat? I'm starving, it's unbearable. Alex stared at his mother in confusion. But she deceived me back then, Alejandro said, turning his gaze to Hope. And I found out about it just a couple of days later. At that time, my mother's friend, Aunt Isolda, came over. They were sitting in the kitchen, drinking, of course, and chatting about life. And I overheard everything. Maybe you shouldn't have left the little boy at the maternity ward? Aunt Isolda asked, sadly looking at her friend. Where would I keep him, Isolda? We're already sleeping on top of each other, we have nothing to eat at home, and who knows, someone might take him, he's still so small. There are plenty of childless people out there. But nature has rewarded me with boundless fertility. But it was still a boy. He would have grown up and become your support, your helper. And Alex was so eager to have a brother. He had all sorts of dreams. What if he wants to fly to the moon tomorrow, huh? Do I need to rush out and buy him a rocket? Alex froze in the doorway. He was keeping an eye on the little ones in the yard. One of his nieces wanted some water, so the boy went inside to fetch it, and that's when he overheard everything. So, his mother had lied to him. It meant that Alex did have a brother. But now they would send him to some orphanage or to other people, nice people, and this little boy, he wouldn't even know he had a brother who had longed for him and waited for him so much. The boy cried then out of pain, despair, and the impossibility of changing anything. Alex understood that trying to convince his mother was useless. She would never bring his brother home, and it might even be too late. Children were nothing but an annoyance to her. Several years passed, and life was not easy for Alex. His mother drank more and more, gradually losing her humanity. Fortunately, she didn't have any more children. The older sisters slowly left the nest, going their separate ways. Soon, Alex became the oldest of all of Letitia's offspring in the house. He was around 12 at the time, while his youngest sister, Lori, had just turned 7. Lori was special. She spoke poorly, didn't always understand when someone spoke to her. The village kids teased her, calling her a dummy, but Lori would just smile in response to those insults. That's how she was, open, sincere, and defenseless. She loved everyone around her, everything in this world fascinated her. Alex had grown attached to Lori. How could he not? He had been taking care of her since she was a baby, feeding her, bathing her, putting her to sleep. Sometimes she would hug him with her little hands, rest her curly head on his shoulder, and Alex would feel like the strongest, most loved, and almost all-powerful person in the world. He protected his little sister from the teasing kids and took care of her. He watched over Lori even more closely than the other younger sisters because she didn't always understand what she was doing and couldn't always recognize danger. He was always worried about her. Mother drank throughout the entire pregnancy, that's why the child was born sick, the neighbors would gossip. But Alex couldn't help but wonder, if his mother had behaved differently, would his sister have turned out different, just like the others? Would Lori still be so kind, open, and sincere? Alex always made sure the gate to the yard was locked. Lori often played alone near the house, where the boy had specially set up swings made from a car tire and a sandbox just for her. He rarely took her to the communal playground. There was always someone there who would insult her or even push her. Alex had also taught his sisters to keep an eye on the gate, and they diligently carried out his instructions. None of them loved Lori in the same way as Alex did, but they all had their own ways of showing affection. But their mother, talking to her was futile. In her sober moments, Letitia still understood and realized things, but once she started drinking. That's why, when their mother was drunk, Alex tried not to leave Lori unattended. Anything could happen. But on that fateful evening, the boy went to the store. He needed to buy bread and rice, and they had run out of milk. So he set off, leaving Lori in the yard. There was no one at home. His mother was visiting the Monteros at the other end of the village. Their family was almost the same as theirs, with moonshine being produced in the house and numerous children growing like weeds. The only difference was that the head of their family was present, which the Monteros proudly referred to as their full-fledged family. Alex knew his mother would stay there until morning. She would either come back late at night, or already with the dawn, fall asleep directly in the hayloft, or maybe even on the porch. Her sleep would be overcome by a deep slumber. That's why the boy was calm about Lori. Nothing would happen if she played outside in their yard. But his mother came earlier. Some argument had happened at the Monteros, so the woman stormed out of their friend's house, proudly slamming the door. Of course, Letitia had already managed to wet her eyes thoroughly. She didn't even think about the gate, although she couldn't have missed seeing Lori in the sandbox. She left the gate wide open and went to sleep. Upon returning, Alex immediately saw the door wide open. A terrible premonition gripped his heart. He rushed into the yard. The playground was empty. He ran into the house, hoping that Lori had gone to the kitchen. She liked to play with dishes. But at the table, he found only his mother. She was smoking, shaking the ashes right onto the tablecloth. In front of her stood a half-empty bottle of some cheap booze. "Sonny's here," Letitia grinned when she saw her son. "Brought some bread, that's good. It'll go well with the snacks." "Where's Loriana?" "There, playing in the sandbox." Letitia waved her hand towards the window. She didn't like her youngest daughter. The woman didn't particularly burden herself with maternal responsibilities, but if she was indifferent to other children, she felt genuine antipathy towards Lori. The girl annoyed her with just her appearance. "She's not there," Alex exclaimed in despair and rushed outside. Maybe he could intercept his sister before she went too far. Lori never went outside the gate alone. Usually, Alex accompanied her. Occasionally she went for a walk with Amelia, the eldest of the sisters who still lived at home. Lori should never be left alone. She could behave unpredictably, get scared, or go somewhere dangerous. Neighbor Sonora Payne noticed Alex in a panic, running around the village, learned what was happening, screamed, gathered people. Now a whole group was looking for Loriana. By evening, it became clear that they couldn't handle it on their own, so they called the police. The search lasted for about 2 days. By the end of the first day, people were already saying that the child was unlikely to be found alive. Alex didn't even want to think about it. He blamed himself for not taking Loriana with him to the store. But he couldn't have imagined that his mother would return so early. Then divers found Lori. Apparently, she went straight to the lake. Alex often took his sister to the water. She liked to splash around in the shallows, build sandcastles, bask in the sun. Apparently, being outside, the girl remembered the place where she felt good and hurried there. Alex watched his sister carefully during such walks, never took his eyes off her, didn't let her go too deep. Loriana didn't understand the danger, but she always obeyed her brother without question. But this time, Alex wasn't there to stop her. She went into the deep water and couldn't get out, and a tragedy happened. It's so terrifying. Even after many years, Alejandro couldn't calmly recall what had happened. To this day, I remember it in the smallest detail. The police came to our house, called us to the shore. I understood everything right away, but I still had hope. Mother hadn't been drinking for those 2 days since she was under constant surveillance by neighbors and the police. But she didn't care at all about Loriana. All this fuss about the missing daughter irritated her. Seeing the crowd of people on the shore, Alex rushed forward. One of the policemen stopped him. "Don't, kid, don't look." But they allowed the mother to go where something covered with a colorful blanket lay. That was Lori. After that incident, the family finally caught the attention of Child Protective Services. Strict women with folders in their hands, policemen, and other responsible officials began to visit Letitia's house. Alex heard words from them like unsanitary conditions, inappropriate living conditions, and irresponsible mother. He didn't understand much at the time about what was happening. All his thoughts were consumed by the tragedy that had befallen Loriana. The boy blamed himself for what had happened. All it would have taken was to take his sister with him to the store, and nothing would have happened. But it seemed that his mother was almost happy about her sick daughter's disappearance. Well, that's how it happens. Anyway, Lori was a little fool, not fit to live. These words from his mother infuriated Alex, but he kept silent, not arguing. He had long since realized what kind of person his mother was. It was pointless to explain anything to her. The visits by officials ended with Letitia being stripped of her parental rights, and the children were sent to a children's home. Alex and Amelia ended up in the same shelter, while the younger girls were sent elsewhere. They were quickly adopted by some well-off family. It seemed that the sisters were taken by a wealthy family. They were taken to another city, and their lives took a completely different turn. Alex hoped very much that they were happy and carefree. Alex himself liked the children's home, clean bedding, delicious food, decent clothing, new shoes. Life became easier immediately. No more late-night kitchen revelry, no long list of household chores. They took care of Alex here, fed him, and didn't mistreat him much. Compared to home, it was a paradise. The boy finally felt like a child. Finally, Alex got the opportunity to study. He had always been interested in science, but at home, he hardly had time for lessons. However, he didn't manage to achieve good grades. His education had been neglected for too long. But his sister, Amelia, preferred the free-spirited life at home. I can't go wherever I want here, all by the rules, Emmy complained. She dreamed of breaking free as soon as possible. Time passed. Alex and Emilia were released from the children's home. By that time, their mother was no longer alive, she had died. Brother and sister returned to their old home, half ruined, old, dirty. Alex honestly tried to start a new life, but he couldn't succeed in anything. He couldn't find a job, he lacked education. He started doing odd jobs around the village, weeding gardens, chopping wood. People often paid him in moonshine, and he gradually developed a habit. It really is a bit easier when you get a little drunk, Alejandro shook his head. Bad thoughts disappear. You don't think about your brother at that moment, or about Lori, or even about mother. Yes, Hope said. You've had a lot of losses and hardships in your life. That's for sure. There was a pitter-patter of little, light footsteps on the porch. In an instant, an 8-year-old girl burst into the kitchen. She was incredibly cute, even in her old, ill-fitting clothes. Bright green eyes, long, slightly disheveled brown hair. The little girl resembled Armando so much that you could easily mistake her for his daughter. Maria's back, Alejandro beamed. The girl ran up to him, hugged him, and then looked at Hope and asked in a childlike, straightforward manner. Who's this? This? She's our guest. You'll meet her later. Go play in the yard for a bit. We need to talk. Okay, the girl nodded. Then I'll go to the Serranos. They got new dolls for Kate, and we're going to play with them. Go ahead, Alejandro nodded. Maria, after glancing at the guest again, dashed out of the house. Is she your daughter? She's so beautiful. By the way, you two look alike. Niece, Alejandro smiled. Emilia's daughter. Emmy followed in her mother's footsteps. She gave birth but doesn't want to raise the child. She's supposedly gone to work in the city now, and people say she's found a new love there. She drinks, parties, doesn't think about the child at all. So now I'm looking after Maria as best as I can. I'm not the greatest caretaker, but still better than no one. How can that be? Hope couldn't understand what she was hearing. How can someone abandon their own child? Well, it happens easily, Alejandro shrugged. As I said, Emilia is just like her mother. She doesn't need Maria, just like we weren't particularly needed by our mother. She gets child support, and that's that. So, tell me about him, about brother. I've dreamed of meeting him all my life, but I never thought it was possible, and now. Hope told him. Talking about her husband was easy and pleasant. She loved Armando and was proud of him. Alejandro listened attentively. He was interested in everything, what Armando did for a living, what movies they liked to watch, what he dreamt of. When can I meet him? Tomorrow, if you like. So, are you willing to undergo the tests and, if necessary, donate? You're asking, exclaimed Alejandro. There's no need to discuss it. I'll do whatever it takes. Thank you. Hope was on the verge of tears with relief. This stranger, living in a village in an old house, someone who hadn't achieved much in life, turned out to be so kind, so humane, so compassionate. It touched her deeply. Where do I need to go tomorrow, and what time? Hope gave him the address of the hospital. I'll meet you at the main gate. I'll inform the doctors today. Everything will be ready. The next morning, when she arrived at the designated meeting place, Hope immediately spotted Alejandro. She felt a wave of relief. She had been worried that he might change his mind or drink too much the night before and wouldn't be able to get out of bed in the morning, but that wasn't the case. Alejandro was at the gate ahead of the scheduled time, looking anxious, clean-shaven, and neatly dressed. It was clear that he had prepared himself. First, Hope led him to the laboratory. The doctors were already prepared for the not-so-simple procedure. When it was all over, Alejandro asked if he could see his brother. He pronounced the word brother with a special warmth in his voice, full of hope. Yes, you can. but I haven't had a chance to tell him about you yet, so be prepared for a surprise. This morning, Armando felt a little better. The new medications that sustained his life seemed to be working well. He smiled broadly upon seeing his wife. "Hi. You're up early today. Didn't expect to see you now. Hi. I have some news for you. I don't even know where to start." About 20 minutes later, Hope was sitting in the corridor outside her husband's room. Alejandro was with Armando. Seeing them together, she was once again struck by the resemblance between the brothers. It could only be brothers. They were talking inside the room about something. They needed to talk, to get to know each other better. Hope left to avoid interfering or making things awkward. Hope was happy that Armando had found a family member. Her husband had both longed for and feared this moment. But Alejandro, this man with a troubled childhood and a complicated fate, he was very kind and pleasant. Interaction with such a brother would undoubtedly be beneficial for Armando. Now Hope prayed for one thing, that Alejandro would be a suitable donor for Armando. The results would take a while, 3 whole days. Those 3 days seemed endless. Hope didn't know what to do to distract herself from thinking about the tests, because if Alejandro didn't match, it essentially meant the end for her husband. Alejandro assured her that if necessary, he would find his sister in Capital and make her undergo the tests. But Hope had a feeling that the unknown Emilia would be reluctant to become a donor, even money might not help, and time would be lost. 3 days later, Hope was literally jumping for joy on the living room couch. Professor Velasco himself had called her in the morning and informed her that Alejandro was a perfect match for Armando. "We're preparing your husband for surgery." 2 years had passed since the events described. It was a challenging time. First, a major surgery, then a long recovery. Armando spent several more months in the hospital. Now he was visited not only by his wife, her parents, and friends, but also by his brother. Sometimes Alejandro brought his niece Maria with him. Both Hope and Armando were delighted by the girl's presence. Armando had recovered and returned to work. He was once again energetic and full of life. First and foremost, Armando arranged for his brother to be admitted to a private center to help him overcome his destructive addiction. At first, Alejandro resisted. "Where am I going to go? I've been drinking my whole life. It's hereditary in my case. There's no help for me now. And who will I leave Maria with?" But Armando and Hope insisted, and they took the girl in for the time being. Hope finally felt like a mother. She cooked delicious meals for Maria, took her shopping, and picked out beautiful outfits for the little one. Armando also spent a lot of time with her, helping with her schoolwork, taking her to the park, teaching her to roller skate. The 3 of them were happy together, like a small, close-knit family. It was Alejandro who made the proposal. One day, when Armando and Hope visited him at the center, he, embarrassed and stumbling over his words, asked them a question. "Would you consider formalizing custody of Maria? Her mother hasn't shown any interest in her for a long time. She's as good as absent. And well, what kind of a lonely, drinking man am I to be her guardian? The girl has grown so attached to you. She describes your daily life with such enthusiasm." Of course, Armando and Hope were wholeheartedly in favor of it. They had long dreamt of having a child, and here she was, a ready-made daughter. The spouses often discussed how difficult it would be to part with Maria, but it didn't have to be that way. It was tough, but the couple managed. They stripped Emilia of her parental rights, something the woman didn't regret at all. Maria's biological mother didn't even attend the court hearings. She was notified of everything by letters and phone calls. And of course, Emilia, who was indifferent to her own daughter, had no interest in meeting her younger brother. "Well, that's Emmy," Alejandro shrugged. "She's not mean, but she's carefree and irresponsible. She flits through life, just like her mother." Alejandro's time in the rehabilitation center was beneficial for him. He kicked the addiction and began a completely different life. Of course, his relatives, Armando and Hope, helped him with that. "You do so much for me," Alejandro would sometimes say, feeling embarrassed. "It's awkward, really." "You actually saved my life," Armando would remind him. "Not just me. It was Hope who found me. We both made an effort, and without her." Armando got his brother a job in the same company where he worked. Alejandro had golden hands, and he was very welcome in the technical department. "You should settle down in the city, close to us," Armando often said. "It's easier together." Alejandro agreed with his brother. He sold the rural house, sent a portion of the money to Emilia, as was customary. He used the other half as a down payment on a mortgage. Alejandro bought a small apartment in the city. It was small, but how much space does a single man need? And it was right next door to his brother's house. Everyone was pleased with this arrangement, especially Maria, who was deeply attached to her nurturing uncle. Now, uncle and niece could see each other every day. They often visited each other's homes and, you could say, lived next door to each other. They celebrated all holidays together, of course. Armando had finally found a family. He had gained a brother. Watching Alejandro and Armando conversing casually about something, Hope was happy. Brothers together, despite everything. It was so wonderful that they had each other. Hope even felt a little envious, in a good way, of course. She had always dreamed of having a sister or a brother, but her parents never dared to have a second child. Having such a genuine family member was truly wonderful.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe.